Hey, Armand here with your forecast for the week of April 21st, 2025. What a week we have. This is a week of tension and release. It's a week of release of tensions and not necessarily in an easy way. There's a lot of stuff going on this week. It's very hot. And I think, well, no, I would say this is like an earth-shattering kind of situation, but you probably could say, well, this guy says every week there's some new intensity coming up, there's this new thing. Well, is it not the case? Is it not the case that every week we have some greater intensity than we would have thought we were going to have? You think, well, you can't ramp it up anymore. Well, you can ramp it up a little bit more. And this week, I think, is going to ramp it up. The good news, so to speak, sort of good news, is that the majority of this should be happening on the collective level. The bad news then would be that you are the collective, right? This is you. We are the collective. This is where we live. We live in the collective. It's not something that you watch on TV. If you've taken a look at your 401k lately, you'll know just what I mean. That's the market's moving downward, or it's a collective thing, but it's something that's affecting you personally. And with all of the things that are happening out there in the collective, we can feel them getting closer and closer and closer to home. You know, even the political contentiousness that we have, particularly here in the US, we have a very polarized atmosphere. And is that not flooding into our personal lives such that, we have conflicts with coworkers, family members, significant others, even, right? It's not out there anymore. It is in here as well. So the fact that these things are happening out in the collective, or these are collective aspects, doesn't really mean all that much because the line was always blurred, but it's now very intense. I know I said something very like this at the beginning of last week's forecast, but a little reminder is important, especially at this time. So let's talk about the aspects that are in play. Well, we start the week with the Sun square Mars. That's on Sunday, the 20th. The Sun is now in Taurus and representing the principle of what we want things to be about. And Mars, on the other hand, now in Leo, is working out the energies in the sense of what we're proclaiming to be true. Mars in Leo is a little bit like the military parade or something like that. It's that show of force. And yet, the sun in Taurus is a little bit kind of asking the question, who's paying for that? Anyway, even on a personal level, this isn't a very harmonious aspect. Mars is in the sun's sign, and that helps to mitigate it, at least on the personal level, a little bit. It does help to mitigate it a little bit. Mitigate or medicate. I'm not quite sure what I was trying to say there. But it does sort of soften things up a little bit. There's a there's a potential for some dialogue, and yet there's this kind of like, we want this, and yet the way we're going to go about it is not quite that harmonious. Anyway, it just sort of sets the tone for the beginning of the week, if nothing else. A little bit of contentiousness. Well, it sets the tone for the week. Next up, on the 23rd, which now we've only gone as far as Wednesday, and the sun is going to be squaring Pluto. Now the sun again is in Taurus and Pluto is in Aquarius. Here we have the leadership, right? The leadership, think about the sun as the leader, in any society, in any country, in any group. And Pluto in Aquarius is the power of the masses. We're not sure who's going to win. Okay, we're not sure who's going to win. And in fact, Pluto is rallying the force of the masses, power to the people. You've heard me say that a bunch, but it's also changing and in a way eroding the power of the people. right? Exposing some of the problems with the power of the people. And so the sun is squaring Pluto. But this is a face-off between who is in charge, taking that solar leadership position, and the masses. It's happening all over the world, and we're not necessarily betting at any one. We're not betting on the sun or Pluto in this case, you know. And it could go either way, both ways. It's really about transforming everything that it touches. It's not about this is the way things are going to come out. But it's a very, very tense aspect. The sun squaring Pluto. This is not to be forgotten about. This is not to be taken casually. When Pluto was in Capricorn and the sun would square from Aries, then it was about that was I used to say like it's like the king or the queen wants to put up a new wing, and then the Pluto was the financiers. This is different. This is like the king or the queen are trying to get something done in some way or another. And what is the pushback from the crowd? What is the pushback from the masses? Different dynamic. Very, very hot aspect. Anyway, Venus will conjunct Saturn on Thursday, the 24th. Now, Venus pretty much stationed to go direct on April 12th, right next to Saturn. She went over Saturn going retrograde just before her station. And we could actually go back quite some time. I'm going to try to see if I can look just a little quickly over here to see. Venus was conjunct Saturn. Yeah, it was exact on April 7th. This is very close to what we would call Liberation Day, when Trump's tariffs went into effect or were announced, and the result was the precipitous decline in the markets. This aspect, and the initial connection went back, I think, to late January or February. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. I apologize. But it's been in the works for a while. It's been especially hot since the beginning of this month when Venus conjuncted Saturn and then stationed to go direct. And what we could think about this aspect is it's either the bottom falls out or else it gets propped up. That's what I would guess about this. So the market's tumultuous ride downhill is either going to come to a screeching halt, or that's it. Then the train runs out of track, and everything just falls down off the cliff. It seems to be that, especially in the midst of the other tensions that we have going on this week, that seems the way this Venus Saturn aspect would play out. By the way, in our personal lives, this could be if you have anything going on in personal relationships that have been especially tumultuous since the beginning of April. And I'm going to stop this for a second so I can go back and find out the exact date. Yeah, I was right. It was January 18th. So that was around Inauguration Day in the US. Okay. So that's when Venus met with Saturn going forward before her retrograde, then again on April 7th, and then coming forward again on and meeting with Saturn again on the 24th of April this week. So the stories that started right around January 18th reached a peak in early April, and we get kind of like the payoff, as it were. Not at the end of the story, it's maybe the end of a chapter, though. True of personal relationship stuff too, that might have, something might have started going a little bit sideways, or something might have started going really, really well at the end of January, had a new installment or reconsideration of plans back around the beginning of this month or the middle part of this month. And now that we're reaching the end of the month here on April 24th, we're likely to get the end of that story, or again, it's the end of the chapter of that story. Things to kind of keep in mind. It's true of relationships. It's true of personal finances, although your personal finances are connected to everybody else's finances. And it would also be true of creative projects that might have had to take a step back with Venus retrograde. So a lot of anything Venusian, even consideration of luxury items and things like that could be part of the picture. Likely to be getting a relative answer to questions about what's been up in the air. Again, going back to the second half of January. Okay, well, now the next thing that happens, well, the next things that happen are on the 26th, and we would expect this to pop sometime between the 24th and the 27th. And pop is the right word. Two things happen here that are really, really requiring our attention. The first is that Mercury will go over the eclipse degree from the March 29th solar eclipse. Mercury will trigger that solar eclipse, right? Mercury is going to trigger that solar eclipse. And we know that that's the case because Mercury is stationed to go retrograde back on March 15th at that very same degree. That is, he's clearing his shadow. He came up to, this is 24 degrees, is 9 degrees of Aries. Came up to 9 degrees of Aries in March, on March 15th, stationed to go retrograde, went backwards for 3 weeks and came forward. In the meantime, there was an eclipse. While he was retrograde, there was an eclipse at that same degree. That's where the solar eclipse was. And now he's coming back over. And that's what we call a trigger. That's what makes stuff happen. And you think, oh, Mercury. What's Mercury going to do? Mercury does a lot. Mercury is a serious planet and especially serious in this context. Mercury triggers things. Interestingly, Venus stationed to retrograde at 10 degrees Aries, just 1 degree away, and she'll do her own little triggering thing in a few weeks. We'll talk about that when we get there. But anyways, Mercury triggers that solar eclipse. And solar eclipses are powerful. They're powerful new moons. They're seeding something strong and powerful. Remember how many things are moving into Aries now. We have Saturn is on his way into Aries. Neptune has made it into Aries. This is like, we're really getting the Aries vibe pretty strongly here. And we're triggering the eclipse that happened at 9 degrees Aries. So this is big business, as it were. Well, probably not big business, big doings. So that's one thing that's happening. And we can look at that and March 29th, already this was in the midst of, the class the category 3 hurricane that we're having astrologically and terrestrially. We're triggering that and seeing if we can bump it up to category 4. If that was the only thing that was happening, I would say, well, okay. The thing is this. On the 26th of April, Mars, now in Leo, is going to oppose Pluto in Aquarius. Mars-Pluto oppositions. We have the planet of war and we have the planet of power. And when these two tangle, they kind of like each other. They're the co-rulers of Scorpio, but one of the things that they like about each other is their ability to create mischief. And when they oppose each other, you get this kind of volatile energy and release of energy. It is, you know, it's not a friendly little pickleball game or anything like that. This is not a particularly easy aspect for us to be looking at. And you say to yourself, okay, well, what? Well, because of his retrograde, remember Mars was retrograde from December 4th through February 23rd. Because of his retrograde, Mars passed Pluto and then retrograded again opposite Pluto, and now is making his third pass opposite to Pluto. When did Mars first oppose Pluto? Way back on November 3rd. Those of you in the US will immediately draw the conclusion that this was just 2 days before the presidential election. During his retrograde, he passed over he passed over opposite to Pluto on January 6th. and now he is coming forward again and is opposite Pluto on April 26th, the same day that Mercury triggers the eclipse. I mean, I would look right to that day itself. I would look to the 26th to be the day, but because the other aspects this week are so hot, it's a little hard to say, this is when it's happening. I mean, if you had a let's call it a football game. If there's you could this could be European football, American football, doesn't really matter for my analogy over here. You got a football game, it's going to last 3 hours. There's no point at which it's not the football game. It's going on for 3 hours, right? You have this period of time where it's happening. Maybe there's a couple more goals at this period of time or something like that, but it's happening throughout. And that's this week. There's just this high energy, high intensity, picking out that something happened on Friday and it's more related to, oh, I don't know, it's more related to Venus conjunct Saturn or the Sun square Pluto or whatever is not really the point. The point is that this week is the week that the eclipse is triggered. This is the week where we look back as far as November and tensions that were hot then, and they hit another peak. And I think that it's a good week to yeah, it's a good week to step back a little bit. It's a good week to be a little careful about things. Watch out for the volatility. Watch out for the volatility. Mercury is involved, so road rage is a real possibility. Well, road rage always seems to be a possibility, doesn't it? But a little extra here. This is not the most harmonious week we have. This is probably the most difficult week that we have in the thus far in 2025. We have a couple of firecrackers coming up in May too. And of course, you know, this is the wind gust, to 180 miles an hour when we're already in the midst of sustained winds at 150. So, we're not used to it. We're not used to it, and we're not going to get used to it. But it's not exactly new. Anyway, keep your cool. Watch out for others that don't, and I'll see you next week.